Hey ho! Not that I'm calling you a hoe, unless, of course, you identify proudly as a hoe, in which case, hey there, you big hoe. For new viewers who are new to the term, lash equals long-ass section hike. It's a subjective term defined slightly differently by the different people who've used it, but for me, when I'm strolling into my second week, having just picked up my second resupply and walking my way to a third one in a few days and maybe even a fourth one after that, that feels like a lash. Over 100 miles, multiple resupplies, over 2 or more weeks. And that last clip was how hiking vloggers try to film ourselves walking over our cameras because we think that's cool. And now for the not so entertaining but ultra informative part of this video. So there are 3 primary resources, it seems, that most people use to plan their hikes, be it a section hike or a through hike. And that is A, the ATC, that's Appalachian Trail Conservancy, Through Hiker's Companion. B, the AWOL AT Guide, started by a guy named AWOL Miller. His trail name was AWOL, David Miller. And they're both really good. They're slightly different. I'll get into that in a little bit. And then the third primary option that a lot of people use on trail a lot, more specifically, is Guthook, the Guthook app. The Guthook is easy to install. It only costs a little bit of money if you order one section at a time. Purchasing one section will run you about $10 if my memory serves me. As you can see, this is the Springer to Standing Bear Farm section. It shows you water sources, less reliable water sources, shelters, beds, probably hostels or hotels, road crossings. Here you see a restaurant and a lodge in Fontana Village, which is off the trail. The great thing about this is that it does have the GPS feature, which will show you when you are off trail and how to get back to the trail and how far you are from the trail. And clicking on any one of these features will show you exactly how many miles you are from it on trail. So that's really great for people who get lost. Sometimes that happens to everybody. The trail will split and the signage ain't always great. So, and next we have the wonderful elevation feature, which is showing you right now our first badass climb out of the NOC, which is our first day and our shortest day, for understandable reasons, I hope. Then you have this feature, which is where hikers give you real-time updates on what's going on in an area with a water source or a shelter. The bear cables are down. Uh-oh. A fourth feature that I don't hear a lot of other hikers talking about using, but that I definitely always use, is the ATC's interactive map on their website. It isn't a GPS. It cannot tell you where you are on the trail. But if you get a signal, you can open it up and use it, or you can screenshot it and take it with you and use it anytime, which is what I used to do. Gives you the full version first when you launch it. Then you can zoom in and press this button to add layers, and it'll show you a lot of similar things to the Guthook app. You can add parking, shelters, scenic vistas, side trails. So yeah, that's really helpful. So I like to screenshot that and take that with me for areas that I think are iffy, or at least I used to before I had Guthook, which I have now. But again, it's not a GPS. You cannot find yourself on trail using this map. It is, however, helpful for helping you plan a hike beforehand because it tells you all these parking lots and things like that. It's really like the poor man's GPS. When I used to want to go old school with just a map and a compass and a book, just because I thought it was cool, screenshots of this are what I used. The ATC Companion is available for $15.95 on Amazon Prime. I went to the ATC website and found a link to this one, mountaineers.org, where you can also get it for $15.95. The AWOL AT Guide is available on the atguide.com website for $17.95. They printed it in color this year, which is sweet. So both of these books, when you get into them, have some helpful keys in the front for using the companion. They have abbreviations for things, what the symbols mean that you'll be seeing in the pages that follow, the lettering. They tell you a little bit about some issues on the trail in recent years and how to deal with them. They tell you about leave no trace principles. And then as you go on, you'll see that there is sort of a features page that has miles northbound from Springer Mountain and southbound from Katahdin, elevation, and things like the shelters and what's there. You've got campsites, you've got water, things like this. And then as you flip on, you'll find little elevation charts for each of the pages. And they have mileage down here, elevation over here. You just follow with your fingers, and that'll help you determine not just how many miles you'll be going in a day, but what the elevation looks like on that day, which will help you determine whether you can do more miles or less miles, like we're going to have on our first day, going from the NOC here on the Nantahala River at about 1,500 feet of elevation, a little more, to Sassafras Gap at about 4,500, which is about 3,000 feet of elevation climb over about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 miles. A 7-mile climb up 3,000 feet of elevation is probably the biggest climb we've done yet, I think. I'll have to check. It feels like it's going to be really hard. And I'm determining that because that's our first day and we're going to have to rely on whenever the shuttle ends up dropping us off, it won't be a full day of hiking. So that and just the way this climb looks, I think we're probably just going to stop at Sassafras Gap. So this is the kind of stuff you need to take into consideration when you plan your hike. That'll help you determine how far you'll get each day till you get to your end point, which will help you determine your end point, which will help you determine where you need to park or be dropped off. So that's basically the name of the game. Now, along with these different views that you get here, you'll also get details about the places you're hiking through. You will get details about places like the Nantahala Outdoor Center, lodging, groceries, and restaurants nearby, outfitters. There's shuttles, people who will drive you places. And both books have really great little maps of the trail towns to help you plan for rides and resupplies of gear or food or what have you. Hostels, where you can send your resupply boxes, and they'll usually hold them for you if you're staying in the hostel. And as I think I mentioned before, you know, most people only want to carry a few days of food, so you'll need to stop somewhere every few days. For us, that's on average about every 4 days. So we usually just plan to stay in a hostel. So we can stay in a hostel, get a rest after a few days of camping, usually in rain because it rains a lot, get dry, get laundry done, and head on again. So we'll probably stay in 3 hostels this time, just like we did last time. This book looks much the same, only since it's printed in color, it looks real pretty. What I like about this book is that they do this. Every once in a while, they'll tell you about the flowers that you're seeing in the area. And this year, they're in color. And I love that. I love learning about the local flora. Now, that's what I like about this one. What I don't like about this one is how the elevation map, where as you see here, it's kind of separated. So if you have a scrambled brain like me and need to see the two views separated like that to help you plan, it's not separate here. It's all together with the features and mileage to the side here on the same page with, you know, elevation written like this and the mountains in the background like this. Now, a lot of people like that, but for me, for my brain, it's a little bit too much. It's just too much. I like to see this view. It's much simpler. I plan using this view basically and just look for more details on the features page that I might need. But I do like looking through here. Sometimes I do find it helpful to see them both in the same place. Just more often than not, I tend to like it this way. So, you know, it's really your choice. You can get one or the other, or do like me and get both, because you just get that excited about planning and you like to have both views sometimes. I just rip the pages out of the section I'll be doing rather than taking the whole book with me, because I don't want the extra weight. And that's what most people do, I think. And, you know, if you're doing a long enough section that you want to rip out a few pages and then put some in your mail drop, that's a good idea too. Just kind of mail yourself the next few pages, and then after that you mail yourself the next few pages. So, yep, that's pretty much how you use it. Now, on day 2, the terrain looks a little easier. So I have us going from Sassafras Gap either to Cody Gap campsite as plan A, which is 12.1 miles, or probably more likely plan B, if we're feeling all right, 15.4 miles to Cable Gap Shelter. And here is what that looks like in this view. Sassafras Gap to either Cody Gap or Cable Gap. As you can see, it's a pretty good looking day. No huge climbs or descents, so I think we can probably make it the 15.4 miles. And that is one thing we have learned going on these hikes, is our evolving trail mile capabilities. So that's something to take into consideration, which is, again, why you need to go on a multi-day and multi-night hike before you plan a long-ass section hike, so you can better plan your long-ass section hike based on what kind of miles you can reasonably do. The shelters, which are very simple wooden sleep structures which offer shelter from the rain, they're usually about every 10 miles, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. So I wouldn't worry too much about where you'll get your shelter. In between those places, if you absolutely just can't go that far, there are little campsites marked by tents. And these little squiggly droplets here that look kind of like sperm or tadpoles, those are water sources. There's a few of them here, as you can see. And speaking of water, one thing I want to talk about that I think a lot of people worry about, that I talk to who are interested in planning such long hikes, is water. A lot of people worry a lot about water, and I mean, understandable, because water is life. You can't live without it. But I think a lot of people worry a lot more about it than they need to, at least on the Appalachian Trail. And here's why. There are so many water sources, especially when you're hiking through spring and summer particularly are great times to hike, which when you're a section hiker as opposed to a through hiker, you can do a long ass section in those 2 seasons and find abundant water sources. At least a couple a day usually. So you're probably fine carrying 2 1-liter bottles, and maybe not even having them full all the time depending on when your next water source is, which is something that fortunately these books will tell you, and gut hooks will too. So you'll know, do I need to like camel up here and then fill up both of my bottles too? And cameling up is when you drink as much water as you can at the water source, as well as filling up your 2 bottles, so you don't need as much water as soon after collecting it. So you'll find out those water sources, how far away they are, how much water you need to get in that moment, and you'll always have enough. You'll never need to carry probably more than like 2 liters. sometimes 1.5 liters, sometimes only 1 liter before your next water source, which is great because water's heavy. So anytime you've got a lot of water sources and you can carry less, that's awesome. But I know a lady who was a thru hiker who we met at Boots Off Hostel on our last year. And her trail name was Water Queen, and some of my viewers probably know her. She was called Water Queen because starting out she was so worried about water that she had two 2-liter bottles, I think that's what she said, if I'm remembering correctly, as well as like a really large 3-liter water bladder. And she was like carrying as much as she could in each of those things because she was so worried about running out of water. And she realized quickly, like within her first couple of days, I don't need to carry this much water. But they called her the Water Queen, and it stuck. And she went with it, and she embraced it. And it's kind of a beautiful name. She takes pictures of herself posing with leaves in her hair in the water and acts like a water queen. I love it. Anyway, that's how a lot of people get their trail names. So water is not something you need to worry about so much. So don't worry so much about that. You'll be okay. And as far as resupply goes, once you know how many miles you can go each day and therefore how many days you'll be going between places in the book where you can get your resupply box or go shopping for resupply, then you'll be set. You just call those places. I typically call just to make sure that they'll hold your resupply. Usually if it's a hostel that you're staying at, they'll hold it for free. And I typically give it 2 weeks to get there. I go buy myself some high-calorie, high-protein foods and put them in a box, put the address on the box to the hostel or hotel or post office or what have you, and send it about 2 weeks before the time I'll get there. It's like sending a care package to yourself. Of course, then there are the days like the one we had where we decided to push on almost 20 miles into Damascus so we could have a 0-mile day the next day, a 0 day. Those are the days that you kind of don't plan for, but you think, hey, I can do it, and I could really use a 0 tomorrow. And that's not something you can always plan for. It just happens, in which case you end up going even further in the end, or having a nice 0 day. Plans will sometimes change, but it's always good to have a tentative plan marked down, which is why I love these paper books so much. Stealth sites are awesome. Usually they're just beautiful, out in the middle of nowhere. You don't expect them. They're not always in the book. And when that happens on a day where you were trying to take a longer day, but you kind of wished it wasn't that long, you see one and you rejoice. That happened once on our lash. Most of the times we'd see these really cool stealth spots where we were not ready to stop yet at all. And we always hated that because some of them were really beautiful, especially in Cherokee. By that river near Laurel Fork Falls. Oh man, that was beautiful. The part that I would say is the most complicated about planning a really long hike like this, where your ending point is so far from your starting point, is probably finding transportation to and from those points. If you're lucky enough to have loved ones that live close enough to both points that they would come and drop you off, or 2 different loved ones for each point who would drop you off and go home and then, come back and get you, then that's great. But you have to consider the possibility that you might have to spend a pretty penny on one of the shuttle services that would actually drive several hours for such a feat. We found one. It's pricey. So I'm just hoping we'll be able to convince my mom and dad to drive the couple of hours from their cabin, which we'll be driving 6 hours to spend the night before the day we leave to start hiking. Yeah, I hope they'll be willing to do that, but they might not be. And, in which case we'll spend the money on that shuttle service that is part of the Hike In the Fontana region, who will drive from Atlanta, Georgia, all the way up to Damascus, Virginia. But yeah, those are there. Those people who will do that, they're there in the book with numbers. You just have to be willing to pay. So now that I've worked all day on this video and had struggles with editing software that has made itself somehow less user-friendly, and me and my non-tech savvy self as it is kind of bugging out a little bit, I'm tired. So I'm going to go to sleep now and call that the end of this video. So good night. Well, I am climbing high mountains trying to get home.